This is the Veterinary Project Podcast, episode 132.
Welcome to the show created by vets featuring absolutely no pets. This is the Veterinary Project Podcast, hosted by Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Light. Our resident veterinarians have swapped out their stethoscopes in favor of microphones to bring you the Veterinary Project Podcast, a show focused on real conversations, aimed to connect this amazing profession full of remarkable people. Through the sharing of collective stories and wisdom, and connecting over the many unique challenges we face, we invite you to join our community of veterinary professionals leading intentional lives. And now, here are the hosts of the Veterinary Project Podcast, Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Light.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Another episode of the Veterinary Project Podcast. No Jonathan with us today, just me behind the mic hosting, but we do have an amazing guest with us today, Dr. Melanie Barham. She is with Vets Stay Go Diversify, the largest career support community for veterinary professionals in the world. That name may sound familiar because she was actually one of our earlier guests way back on episode 35, April 21st, 2021. And she's just done so many amazing things in the veterinary community. This is kind of a catch-up episode, but really we dive deep into storytelling, and talking about with how Vets Stay Go works with veterinary professionals and veterinary employers and really pulling out people's stories and finding that match. And I thought I would take the opportunity, since I've got no Jonathan here to banter with, to tell everyone listening a story. So this is one of my favorite stories. As many of you know, I have a book that came out a couple months ago, You're Gonna Get Peed On. And this story actually opened the chapter on self-care. But somewhere along the way, I was working with an editing team, and the way the chapter evolved, the story just didn't really fit in. And it actually got cut. It got cut from the book. And I mean, obviously, I had the final approval to be like, okay, we'll let go of this story. But I really like it. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to share it with everyone. So this is a story actually about my wife, Rosalie. And for those of you that have not met her, very caring, very kind soul. And back when she was a little girl, in elementary school, 6 years old, her most favorite snack in the world was Viva Puffs. So for those of you that don't know, Viva Puffs are kind of these, cookie crumble, marshmallowy treat that's wrapped in chocolate, very delicious for little kids. And every day her mom would pack 2 of these Viva Puffs in her lunch kit, right? So off Rosalie would go, 2 Viva Puffs, her sandwich and her vegetables and all that, off to school. And at lunchtime, the other kids would see these Viva Puffs. And of course they want some, right? They're delicious. And Rosalie every day would share one of these Viva Puffs with one of her classmates, and they would sit there and enjoy the Viva Puff. And it would bring Rosalie all this joy, to share this treat with others. But there was more kids than there was Viva Puffs. And so they would keep lining up every day. And eventually Rosalie started giving away both of her Viva Puffs, right? So 2 lucky classmates would each get a Viva Puff. Rosalie would be left with none. And this goes on, day after day, week after week, month after month, until she finally starts to get a little bit sick of it, but she just couldn't bring herself to say no to her classmates. So her solution was, in the morning, after her mom had packed her lunch, she would sneak away with her lunch kit and she would eat her Viva Puffs before the school bus even came. And she got away with this for a little while, but eventually her mom caught her. And it sort of begged the question. Her mom starts probing, like, Rosalie, why are you sneaking away to eat your lunch kit? Why are you eating your Viva Puffs here early in the morning? And so Rosalie finally confesses that at school, all the kids want her Viva Puffs. They all ask for her Viva Puffs, and she can't say no to them. She doesn't want to say no, so she ends up giving them away, but she really wants them. And when she told me that story, it kind of just stuck, and it's become in our household this gentle nudge that we'll say to each other, if one of us is, not respecting our boundaries or being taken advantage of or whatnot, and it'll be a gentle reminder, hey, quit giving away your Viva Puffs, right? We can just look at each other, say that, we kind of laugh about it, now, but I just wanted to share that story with everyone because I can picture it. I know Rosalie better than all of you listening, but I can picture, this little girl that loves this treat, but just can't handle saying no to people. And I feel like that really fits in the veterinary community. Sometimes we're all guilty of giving away our Viva Puff. So just wanted to take that opportunity without Jonathan here hogging the mic to share that story with everyone. So time to dive in. So as I mentioned, we have Dr. Melanie Barham with us here today. Melanie is a veterinarian, entrepreneur, speaker, educator, and mom. Melanie loves working with teams to create change, find new ways to think through problems, and collaborate. She holds a DVM from the Ontario Veterinary College, an MBA in Sustainable Commerce from the University of Guelph, and a project management professional designation. Melanie has held roles in many fields of vet med, including sport horse medicine, consulting, laboratory surveillance, not-for-profit, NGO, and charity sectors. She founded the DVM Project, the North American branch of Vets Stay Go Diversify, and formally joined Vets Stay Go Diversify team in September of 2022. Melanie's MBA research focused on veterinary career paths. Outside of vet med, Melanie loves riding horses, hiking, and cross-country skiing, writing, and beekeeping. This was a great episode, really focuses in on storytelling. I truly believe storytelling is one of those high-value skills. I would encourage everyone to spend some time, practicing it, learning it, perfecting that skill, because it applies in all areas of life, veterinary medicine and otherwise. Please enjoy this episode with Dr. Melanie Barham. All right, Melanie, great to have you back on the podcast. As we were saying before we hit record here, it has been a while, 2 years, kind of 100 episodes since you've been on. So I'm sure lots has changed in your world. Good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I can't believe it's been 2 years. I was reflecting on that just before this. So yeah, it's great to be here.
It's scary. They say sort of our perception of time speeds up as we get older. I'm not going to put you on the spot with your age, but I'm 38 and it's like, it feels like things are in fast forward now. So I'm like, wow, what is the next few decades going to be like? But it went fast.
Yeah, no kidding. So yeah, lots has changed. Maybe I'll give you a quick update at the beginning here. So I think when we last spoke, I was working at the University of Guelph, working on my MBA, and mostly I think our last podcast focused a lot on being a project management professional and some of the different, and I guess juggling lots of things, going back to school. So it was a really fun and interesting time. I'm glad to say I'm not studying anymore. So that's fantastic. So I had started in 2020, I had started a company called the DVM Project, and it had grown from a blog and a way to document and share the stories of all kinds of different career paths in veterinary medicine. And we put on some big conferences, including the Global Vet Career Summit that Mike, you and Jonathan helped out with, and the Big Student Careers Fair. So there was lots of things that happened. And then I took a job with a national not-for-profit 2021, actually, not too long after our podcast aired. And while I was so busy, I ended up looking for other people to collaborate with, and I ended up partnering and actually merging with longtime collaborator Vets Stay Go Diversify. So the DVM project merged together with Vets Stay Go Diversify, and when we merged, it actually made more sense for me to come over and work for them. And amazing to work in this passion area of mine that is helping people find their fit within the profession and helping workplaces find their best fit too in employees. So really matching people up together and telling their stories and doing all kinds of career activities around those. So I've been doing that since September, and it's been an amazing journey. So I'm working with VSGD, as we say, as a short form, mostly. And then I also work a little bit with community veterinary outreach as well. So yeah, it's been a busy fall and springtime.
I'll say I'm kind of chuckling because you said when we first spoke to you, you were juggling all these things, and now things are more even, but I'm like, you still got a lot on the go when I look at everything here. It's funny. I took our daughter in the mall. They had a little pop-up dog rescue, and I recognized the banner. And then I remember reaching out to you and being like, hey, is this your group? And I think it's Community Veterinary Outreach, and you're the sort of the acting CEO for them.
I am. So I have this 2 CEO hat, which is a really interesting place to be. So, but it's kind of, people say, oh, that's interesting. How do you do that? But I think it's great because it's both strategy and both kind of leading, which is really fun, and leading really amazing, and teams that are all virtual too, which is cool. So Community Veterinary Outreach is a registered charity in Canada and the US, and they provide human and pet healthcare to homeless and vulnerably housed people and their pets in Canada and in the US. And we have 11 locations in Canada and 1 in the US. So really, and a really wonderful, amazing team that we have that's been, and CVO is celebrating their 20th anniversary, if you can believe it. So it's been going for a long time.
Wow. And you said human and animal healthcare?
Yeah, so it's a really cool model. So a lot of people, there's lots of outreach that's going on everywhere where people will provide free veterinary care to pets in need, or there's humane society models, et cetera. CVO, what drew me to it is because it really is focused on building connections with human healthcare too. So every clinic that we put on has not only pro bono veterinary care, but we also have human services there too. So it varies by region, varies by clinic and what we put on, but it could be anything like housing services, it could be vaccines, it could be dental services, and this is for the people. And then we treat the pets as well, which is very, very cool. So, and in a lot of cases with our clientele, all of them love their pets so much. And it's such a great event for them to come in and have their pet treated and get some, and we also do, we also provide some pet gear and food, et cetera, at the same time. But to see them scaffold over and feel comfortable enough to take up some of those human healthcare interventions is where kind of, for me, the magic is really there. It's a real One Health model. And so it lowers the barriers to accessing them. It really lowers the stigma that might be associated with accessing those kind of services. And it's just like, here, while you're here, do you want to also take up this? Do you want to have a nutrition consult? Do you want to have this? Like, it's here while you're waiting. Do you want to take it up? I find it really amazing to watch and to really be part of.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because a lot of people will be like, okay, if their pet needs help, they'll do that because it's for someone else. But if they have to go for themselves for whatever reason, they won't. So that is brilliant, where it's like, okay, we're here for the pet. By the way, we have all these services for you. That's amazing.
Yeah. And it's also been so neat to see just how well, it's been really amazing to see how well cared for all of those pets are and how loved they are. Like, it's a beautiful thing. It's really lovely to see, and how nice that it's also wonderful to see lots of people come for training. Like sometimes we'll have dental hygienist students come, or we'll have veterinary technician students come. And it's really nice to be able to be part of that and to be able to contribute to learning as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know we're going to spend a lot of time here. We're going to get into your current role.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a lot about storytelling. I'm thinking in that role, you probably hear some amazing stories, like of people and their pets.
It's true. Yeah, that's it. That's right. And so, like, I guess really one of the things that I was reflecting on, and while we were kind of talking about how we were going to, what we were going to talk about as the central theme here. The one thing I've been really reflecting on is that as I've morphed into this role is that it is really all about storytelling, and it is really all about, both from the Vets Stay Go Diversify side and the community veterinary outreach side, it is really all about storytelling as a way to build trust and to showcase and to show who you really are behind all of our misconceptions between one another. So in my role at VSGD, I do a lot of career coaching and veterinary resume review. And then we also work with workplaces to showcase their best selves, to find and to showcase their stories so that we can find fits for them. And it strikes me that a lot of times we undersell ourselves, or we don't see what's different or unique about ourselves. And that makes it hard to see the unique and cool things about you. And if you've ever, as a job seeker, or as somebody who's seen resumes, if you ever get a stack of them, after 3 or 4, they start to all look the same. And it's the same with job ads. Like, we look at them and we're like, oh, scroll through this 2-doctor practice that has a great blood machine, like in beautiful middle of nowhere, whatever. Like, yeah. Come work in our beautiful hiking area. And you're like, yo, there's so many other things that are about you that are so cool.
Yeah. Okay. We'll jump in there, because that was one of the first things I said to you. I was like, I want to be rude, but it's like, it feels like we take storytelling and then everyone tells kind of the same story. And like you said, that it all blends together. So it's like, well, what's different here? Right? How do you pull that out? Like, whether you're working with a job seeker or an employer.
Yeah. So it's been great to kind of hone this craft, because I've always loved telling people stories. I've always been kind of a nosy person, I think. And that's what drove me to be to do the DVM project. But even before that, I think in high school, I used to I even remember a creative writing project that I did where I interviewed senior citizens about their stories about growing up in our area. And I just love telling people stories. But so the open-ended question, I remember learning that term in vet school, the open-ended line of questioning where you ask you start wide and then you narrow down. Those are really what we focus on. It's kind of like being a diagnostician in when you're working with clients, it's kind of the same. You're really asking open-ended questions. So you start with tell me about yourself. And we have a bunch of questions that we always ask both candidates and workplaces. And you start to get better at kind of pulling out those stories. Tell me a bit about this. When we meet with a team, for example, if we focus on the job, the employer side, for example, we meet with a team, we ask them, tell us about yourself. And then we ask them things so tell me about, if they use a buzzword, for example, tell me a bit more about this. Tell me about a time that this was true, or tell me about an example. because that's when the richness starts to come out, both from the candidate side and from the job side, is where they start to tell us, like, for example, I think one of the first ones that I did when I came to VSGD was large animal practice in England. And so I obviously don't know anything about the region or anything like that. But what they started telling me about, they had a young new graduate who was there. And she was that we were talking to, and she was saying, oh, well, when I came to the practice, it was the middle of COVID. And the thing is that when I came, I didn't know anybody in this area, but I really felt like I was at home. Everybody was so kind, and they invited me out for dinner, and they invited me to do hobbies with them. And they really made sure that every night or every weekend I had something to do, and that I wasn't alone. And I even lost my wallet in the first week or something, and I had absolutely nothing. And everybody pulled out cash to help with what I needed because I didn't have any groceries. Like, it was a beautiful story. And that's where you start to realize, like, okay, this is where your values are, because it's easy to say buzzwords like we're family friendly, we treat everyone like family, or we are such a caring team. Like, all of those buzzwords, they're great, but we have to go beyond those in order to get those stories and to be able to make it real for somebody. Because like otherwise it just looks like everybody else's story that's in this 100 words of job ad, or maybe 50 words.
Yeah. That's where with the buzzwords, I'm thinking like, okay, we're creating a story, but it can't be a fictional story, right? Like, this can't just be made up and what we think people want to hear, and then they get there and it's like, actually, this is nothing like what you said.
That's right. Yeah. So it has to be authentic. So that's why I always ask for examples. And I think if you're an employer that's out there listening, it's helpful if you can ask your staff those things. And what we find too is when we're interviewing staff and teams, because we do live events where we would interview the team or interview the boss about what the job is like. That's part of one of our recruitment offerings, is that we do these, where people can really see what it's like and see what the interactions are between the team. What we also find is that employees will often give stories that the employer may not have realized were so important to them. Like, oh, it really meant a lot to me to come to the practice and know that I had, that they had already had all the equipment laid out for me. They had my truck all kitted out, and they had asked me if I was left-handed before I got there. And it made such a difference to me to know that they really wanted me there. Like, but the boss just saw that was a normal thing, because they didn't know that they didn't know any different, because they thought that that's what everyone was doing. Or they forgot that wasn't what everyone was doing. And sometimes it's helpful for your employees to shine a light on those things. So if you're a boss that's out there listening and writing job ads and realizing that maybe you have a lot of buzzwords, it is really helpful to ask your employees and say, how did you know that this was the right place for you? What keeps you here? What is the best thing about working here? Tell me a time when. So ask for examples, because those stories are what are going to tell you, maybe what buzzwords you could actually back up, but also what stories you might want to tell, and how you could maybe tell that a bit better. Because you might be surprised about what people, I'm always surprised at, like, I'm often surprised at what people who are employed by you, when they knew that you were a great boss, or when they knew that you were the right place for them.
Yeah. That tell me keeps coming up, right? Like, that's such a powerful, open-ended question.
Yeah.
Tell me more, tell me about a time. That really opens the floodgates.
That's right. And you sort of watch, it's interesting because I watch their body language on a Zoom or something, and I see like where they're starting to get excited about, and then I pick up a thread, right? And pick up a thread and say like, okay, well, tell me more about this area, and see where they go with it. Because I'm always surprised. And when I interview like a candidate to try and improve their resume or something, it's shocking. Like, somebody will come with a very plain Jane resume, and they'll say like, oh, like, I don't even know if there's anything special about me. I'm trying to get into this area, but I don't think that I have the skills, or I don't even know. And then we talk to them and they're like, oh yeah, last year I did fundraising for this organization. I raised like $100,000. Like, okay, I'm pretty sure you could definitely translate that into a marketing role, because you just handled this enormous event. Or, I remember one person was like, yeah, I was in the Peace Corps as a younger person, or like, all of these like great things that, or I was on the Olympic team of this. And you're like, well, geez, like, those are really good transferable skills. And those make really good stories if we can mold them correctly in a resume.
Okay. Wow. Okay. We're definitely going to deep dive the candidate side now of storytelling. I do want to back up a touch for our listeners. So when we first connected, you were doing your MBA, and you were doing kind of a large global study on veterinary careers. Let's fill in some of that gap there on, what you were up to, maybe some of the findings. I know the research isn't published yet, but if you can kind of tease it, because I think it really lends to your career path, right? Like, I was laughing when you said you interviewed seniors, like you love collecting data, like in all of your roles, like bringing it all together and then compiling it. So fill us in on that, and then that'll lead us into with Vets Stay Go working on the candidate side, because you're very informed on what the candidates want and don't want out there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, and thanks for making that connection. I guess I never really thought of myself as a data gatherer, to be honest with you, because I've always kind of abhorred like the thought of data, but I guess maybe it is like, it's a secret thing. So yeah, so when I was doing my MBA, I'd done all these beautiful interviews. I call them beautiful because they were lovely stories of people's careers in veterinary medicine. And I had interviewed them and they were qualitative interviews. And so I took all of those themes and I had drawn some conclusions, but in my MBA, I had the chance to do some research. The program that I chose at the University of Guelph was in sustainable commerce, and you have the option to do a research project, which is very cool. So I did this large scale survey of veterinarians around the world and asked about their career paths. So, whether they were in clinical practice or not in clinical practice, where they ended up, how they transitioned, what helped them to stay in clinical practice, what helped them to leave, why did they leave, why did they stay, how dedicated were they to the profession, did they feel a sense of professional calling, how did they feel when they left, all of those kind of things. And so yeah, it was over 1,000 respondents from all over the world. Approximately, it was about close to a 50-50 split of people in practice and not in practice anymore. So some people had left the profession entirely, so they didn't need a veterinary degree for what they were doing. And then other people were still they were what we'd call in VSGD diversifiers, where they had diversified out of clinical practice, at least partially, and then people who were in clinical practice. And it was interesting to me because we applied this brief calling scale, which was it's a scale that the standardized careers tool that asks if you feel a sense of calling or a sense of, were you called to be part of this profession? And a lot of people in vet med do feel that way. So we all have a very high. So one of the key findings was that we all have a very high level of calling in veterinary medicine. And it didn't matter how we sliced and diced it. All of us did, whether we stayed in the profession, whether we left the profession, or whether we were in clinical practice or not, all of us felt this really high sense of calling. So it's not that any of us are less or more dedicated to the profession. And those findings, I'm hoping they'll be published this year. I'm working with and so I'll go into a bit more of those highlights. But I'm working with a researcher at the University of Guelph at the Ontario Veterinary College, Dr. Bassem Gohar, who is actually a clinical psychologist. And so he's helping and working together with me to get that published. And then also because the data set was so extensive and I'm never going to be able to publish all of it. He's got a master's student, Kadi Owada, who's working on the rest of it. So it's just really cool to see. I'm so excited to see her project grow and to see the things that she's finding as well in that set. So some of the other key findings that might be of interest to the listeners here are around kind of why, I guess the big things that people found. So people felt the same amount of calling within the profession. And one of the other key things that really stuck out for me was that a good portion of our profession, this is before the pandemic, remember, had thought, more than 70% of us had thought about leaving clinical practice, or more than 70% of those respondents had thought about leaving clinical practice. And the careers researcher, Dr. Sean Lyons, who I partnered with for my MBA, was, I think his eyebrows shot up quite a bit, because there's only 3 steps to leaving your profession. There's thinking about it, taking some small action, and actually leaving. So that number is quite high. So when we think about people finding their fit within the profession, storytelling really becomes pretty central to that, so that we can make sure that they don't feel like they have to leave, and so that we're making good matches within the profession.
Yeah, that kind of blew my mind when you mentioned that to me. And so just to reiterate, this data was all collected before COVID was even thought of, right? Like it wasn't even a thing.
I guess it was in China. So it was in China, but so this data set was collected January, February of 2020. It finished right at the end of February 2020. And then a couple of weeks into March was when COVID hit North America, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was like it's kind of a beautiful and perfect data set, because it shows that some of the problems that we've had or some of the attitudes and things that we know to be that this data set found to be true were true before COVID, as opposed to it being true, as opposed to someone saying, oh, it's a COVID phenomenon, it'll probably change, it'll probably go away.
Yeah, like COVID didn't cause it. It was always lurking.
Or
now.
it's in there, yeah. Or it's just that it's just part of our profession, or it's part of who we are right now. So it was really interesting to have that. So and I had, obviously I had no idea that it was going to become that way, but it was really interesting.
Okay. Okay. So that's cool to sort of lay some of that framework. And I mean, obviously you guys work with everyone, but especially when I hear that over 70%, maybe on one of those steps, and it's just 3 quick steps, hopefully, they can find that fit. So let's pivot back over now. Veterinary candidates, looking for a place to find their fit, and the role of storytelling there of how they can kind of find that dream practice or whatever we want to call it.
All right. So yeah, when we talk about candidates finding their fit and thinking about, so a lot of people that we talk to are, one, they might be feeling burnt out in their role, or they might be thinking, is this all that there is in veterinary medicine? Maybe I've learned all that I can learn in this role, and maybe there's other things for me. So what we think about really is around making sure that you as a person know yourself really, really well. So it's really hard to go and apply for a job if you have a really bad story. Like, I feel burnt out in practice and I just want to get out of practice is not a great story to tell any employer. Or I hated my last employer and it was just awful. I'm hoping this one's going to be a better fit. Really, you want to be running towards an opportunity, and you really want to have a direction, because you might also find yourself in another crummy situation if you don't really do some evaluation of yourself about where you want to be and what really matters to you. Like, what was working really well for you in this role or in the past roles you've had? What's brought you joy? Where's your curiosity taking you nowadays? Like, if you feel like you've learned all you can learn about general practice, but you're really interested in alternative therapies then, or you're really interested in rehab, that's an area of curiosity where you can renew your interest in, or maybe you'd want to take it in that direction. Maybe you don't have to leave clinical practice. Maybe it's about changing what you're interested in or developing some more interest in there. Because that was another finding in this research study, was that really we go through these, I call them kind of renewing our vows within veterinary medicine, where we get good at stuff and we get bored of what we're doing because we're smart individuals. And it's a natural thing for most professionals to try to renew their interest. So we sort of renew, people told us in the survey that what helped them stay in practice was renewing their interest, or finding a different way to practice, or finding a different area of focus. And sometimes it was changing parameters within their job or finding a new job, but it also was a lot of like finding something that energized them again. So I think doing some work around that is helpful, and helping to build your story is part of that. So, I realized that I was really into, I realized after I saw this patient, and I kept seeing these patients where I couldn't help them with XYZ, but I went on this course and I've learned how to help with acupuncture, some of these musculoskeletal problems. So I was, that's really what led me to develop this alternative practice focus or something like that, or a rehab focus. All of those things are kind of our story about why we're moving towards something and why we're going to be good at the next thing. And it's as important, I think, for us to know that story and us to be able to tell it in a believable way, such that we believe it before we're telling it to other people. Because sometimes, you feel like, I could type out a lot of stuff and be like, well, Michael is successful, he's a successful farmer and businessman. Yeah. You don't believe that, then you're never going to say it, or you're going to be like, Michael's a successful business person.
Yeah. It's so true. If you don't believe it, it won't come through. Like, even if you say the words, if you're sitting across the table from someone, they're gonna be like, I don't believe a word that's coming out of your mouth. Yeah. I'm so curious, then this is a big interest of mine. How do you, when you're working with those candidates, that running towards versus running away, right? Yeah. Like, how do you help them shift? Because I know how people can feel when they're running away from something. Yeah. So how do you give them the space, the clarity to kind of step back from that, find their interests, renew it, and start going towards something?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So sometimes people will benefit from coaching. And so I might refer them to a career coach or somebody within our team who might have a specific specialty. Or I might do it myself if it's the right fit for us. But really, so sometimes it's about, sometimes for some people, it takes a bit more time to get to determine what they like, and also to repair if they've really had a challenging time, or to take time to rest and recover and really do that self-worth. Some people are ready right away, and they have a pretty good idea, and they just might need a mirror held up to them and say, like, sometimes we'll do a consult and say, like, what sounds like you really, it sounds like after we've had this conversation that you are really into wildlife, and you're really empathetic person who's interested in fulfilling this kind of purpose. And they'll be like, Yes, that's right. That's really, yes, that's right. And they'll have their direction. They'll be able to set it. So I think it depends on where you're at in your career journey and what might have happened to you and how much clarity you might need. So I think it depends on the tool. I guess it's probably like practice. Like you might not choose like NSAIDs for everything. You might choose, you know what I mean? You might choose a wide variety of things to help with a situation. So I think it's about applying the right tool to help at the right time. That's kind of vague, I guess, but I do feel like and sometimes people will benefit from a group coaching program, and sometimes they'll explore in one of our communities and ask questions in there, or they'll follow our newsletter or something, so it really depends on the person and where they're at their journey. So it's kind of about finding the right fit for them, I suppose. Okay.
Sort of embarrassing admission here. I honestly didn't know with Vets Stay Go Diversify. I wasn't exactly sure like what each piece of that meant until you were talking about the survey, and you said we call them diversifiers.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of making sense to me where, you may have someone that has been 100% clinical practice. And I was very much like this, where it's like, this is all there is. This is 100% the scope of veterinary medicine. Right. And then it could be through working with you or whatnot. All of a sudden, all these other avenues pop up, and it may not be all in on one of them, but it may be more of okay, let's diversify into that. So it finally has clicked to me.
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. I think it's like, so VSGD really started, it started in the UK, and that term has kind of that stay, go, diversify has really come up, and it's really common and it's very much used in the UK. And we're just kind of starting to use it more in North America. But that was one of the reasons that I was totally fine with dropping the DVM project, because one, I think VSGD is much more inclusive of all types of veterinary professionals, as opposed to just talking about DVMs, because we talk to students and talk to veterinary nurses and veterinary technicians. So really we cover all kinds of veterinary professionals, but it also really covers those, like you can stay, you can go, you can diversify. And it's all about kind of exploring what's right for you. Maybe it's a mix, like you don't have to do one or the other, right? You know that, and I know that. Like as the more that you explore, the more you realize that there's really no one right way to be a veterinary professional. There's just so many more shades of gray.
No doubt. Yeah, I'm circling back. Question I have to make sure I get in. You had mentioned underselling as kind of a common thing that you see is, you said on the employer and the candidate. I guess I'm focusing more on the candidate. Any common themes there? Like, why do we undersell ourselves? And what can we do tactically, to help with building that confidence and saying, these are all the things I'm awesome at, and owning it. Like, why are we so bad at that?
Well, I think it feels uncomfortable. So, okay, I think there's a couple reasons, and these are untested and unproven ideas. I used to think it was because we were Canadian, because I worked a lot with Canadian people. So I thought, oh, maybe it's just Canadian, but it's global. It's everywhere. I've not met anybody in a continent that hasn't been an underseller. I think it might be because we're scientists, because we know that, when you say, like, every time that I've ever said, like, this cat will not die, or this horse will be like, definitely, or anytime I've been like, absolutely 100% certain, that's when you get slapped in the face and you're like, I was wrong, and you're eating a big piece of humble pie. So I think we're really good about being like, well, let's sit on the fence here a little bit. And then I think the other part is that a lot of times what is normal for us is extraordinary for somebody else, right? Because you're just going along, living your life either in your workplace, and what you have developed as normal might be, when somebody else comes in, absolutely extraordinary and just wonderful. And we always think of the negative things when somebody wasn't a good fit, and we say, well, I guess it can't be that good of a workplace because so-and-so left, or this didn't go so well, or, this one thing didn't go well. But all of the whole time, like, there are extraordinary and wonderful things. There's reasons why people are at your workplace. There's reasons why people chose you as an employee. There's reasons why why you're a great person. And I think we forget that because it's hard to see in ourselves. So for me, I think one of the big tips is having somebody else hold up a mirror to you is really helpful. Whether that's a colleague or a mentor or a friend, or so asking some open-ended questions like, tell me, if you had to describe me in 3 words, what would you choose? Then those are some good questions to ask. That's a great question to ask your colleague. Or like, tell me one time that you knew that I would, and if they give a word like integrity, then you would say, well, tell me how, like, why do you think that? Because they can give you a story, and then that gives you an idea of what other people see in you. And it's not all about what other people see in you, but sometimes that can help to hold a mirror up to what other people might find extraordinary.
Yeah. Wow. That one landed for me like a lot. you know, and I see that so much. And me and my wife, we both run businesses, you know, and businesses go through ebbs and flows. And we were in one of the trough periods. And then we were like, okay, let's just sit down and talk about this. And it's like, none of it was real, right? Like for whatever reason, just emotionally, we were kind of dipping down, and we did like a reflective exercise where we're like, okay, like 1 year ago, if we said, okay, this is where we'll be, these are some of the goals we'll be hitting. And we're like, holy shit, like we would take
all of those.
Yeah. And it's like, for whatever reason, we get in our own head, you know, and it is how you said that, like normal, like extraordinary becomes normal.
Yeah. Or just like, you know, you don't even realize, like, you don't realize that coming from a different workplace, going into this one, that like that onboarding was really special, or like, you don't realize that that's because everybody literally thinks that that is what everybody. And I remember that as a leader learning, and it's still, sometimes I have to remind myself, that's not how everybody's brain works. Like, that isn't how everybody operates. Other people operate differently, because I assumed that the skills that I had were what everybody had, but other people have way better skills in other areas, and then they don't have as many skills in certain areas. So you can't assume those things. So I think it is helpful to have that mirror. And I think too, like listening to your clients, or maybe just asking on a regular basis, because it's easy to get down on ourselves too, and just see only like, you know, if you're writing a resume, it's a really humbling experience for anybody, because you're just like, yeah, like, just like, I don't know, is this really true? Can I really say that I'm an experienced do? And you're like, what about that one case where I really messed it up? Like, I don't know if I could say experienced. And you're like, you know what, you can, like, it's going to be, you know, those are the things that I think about most, is that we think about the negative things and we think about the times when we've messed up, but it is, when you look at it on the whole, that's what you really need to consider.
Yeah. Okay, no doubt. Okay, so storytelling, I want to go kind of broader on this, because I truly believe, you know, it's one of the highest value skills you can develop, right? And it, as you said, it's transferable, whether we're using it in our veterinary career, in our personal life, wherever. What have been some things for you that have really worked, like at building that storytelling skill?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, I think. So, and it's something I've considered a lot, because when I think about my life in clinical medicine as a horse veterinarian, I think horse veterinarians are usually kind of a lot about folklore and I don't know, like mystique, maybe I probably wasn't very mystical, but I think that we do tell a lot of stories. But I think that's an important part. And so the science behind it, I remember taking this in my MBA course, is like hearing about that, you know, storytelling is more sticky in our memories. It's because it engages all these different areas of our brain. So and storytelling with facts is about 18% more sticky. And if you are, because you're engaging all of these, you're engaging emotion as well as memories and facts as well. It's so much more engaging for your brain. So it lights up all these different parts of your brain when you do an fMRI. But you're also, you know, so that's what helps to make it more convincing and more sticky and more, you know, just more personable, and maybe more, and able to bridge the gap between two parties, where you have to showcase yourself without looking like an arse, maybe, and looking like somebody authentic. And it takes away the bravado and the, you know, the buzzwords, because it's not you spouting a bunch of stuff. And even as a clinician, when we look at the science behind change management and making people helping people along their steps of change, telling stories allows them to think about it, recall it later more easily. It allows them to think about you as a person more, as opposed to somebody who's telling them something. So it is really powerful. And so thinking about an example that you might be able to give of a time when you did XYZ is really important, whether you are sitting as a person in a clinical role talking to a client, or you're trying to bridge a gap between a stakeholder and yourself, or whether you're trying to share your story as a candidate or an employer. And I think those will stick in your mind a lot. They do stick in your mind a lot more. I guess when I think of, like, here's an employer story that I can remember from before I even got to VSGD, because I saw it and I was like, this is amazing. So one of our employers at one of the corporate practices that we served in the UK, it's a corporately owned small animal practice. They have this great culture that I've met them, and I've seen them on their interview the team things. They seem to have this lovely, like, jokey culture. And it's so, but the owner or the manager doesn't like Crocs. So what her staff did, they videoed this, the whole staff dressed in Crocs one day and shot this little video of all of them wearing Crocs. And then she opened the door and one of their staff had dressed as a life-sized Croc shoe. Had made this beautiful thing. And it was just like, it showed their personality. It showed all the things that they value and all the things that they are as a workplace. And I just remember it because it was just like, it was so funny and it made me want to work there. Like, it was just great. But that's such a fun, it's such a that is just such a lovely example of storytelling and making and showing. So using multimedia too. So using video or using photos is so much more engaging than just, me telling you something as well.
Well, I'm just literally thinking of our listeners here, and this could have went something like you saying, tell people about, what makes your clinic memorable, and, that'll help them want to work there. Obviously, I'm butchering that, but versus here's the story of everyone wearing Crocs and dressing in a life-size Croc shoe. It's like our listeners in this episode, that will be something they can remember, because it's like, oh, there's a funny story. I remember when Melanie said that. And then it jogs their memory, right? Versus like, here's some facts.
That's exactly right. So you probably won't remember that I said that storytelling is 18% more effective. Like, you're not going to remember that, but you're going to remember like a Croc story, and you're going to remember. And the other thing that what I want to say is that, you might be thinking, oh gosh, we don't have anything as funny as that. We don't do anything as interesting as that. And when somebody tells you a funny story like that and asks you to immediately synthesize one, you're immediately going to say, oh, I'm definitely not as funny as that. There's no way that that's as good as, I'm not as good as that. But I will tell you that I have not met with a single workplace or a single candidate that doesn't have some freaking amazing stories in there. Like, I never get through a half-hour call with them without saying, wow, are you kidding me? That's awesome. Like, whether that's like their company, they do like a thing in the community where they go around and help, they act as Santa at the local daycares, or whatever it is that they do. There is something extraordinary and wonderful about your workplace, and you do have incredible stories that are in there. It's really about being brave enough to tell them, and also having a moment to kind of bring them up. But it's really also energizing for the whole team. So I actually would also posit that pulling out those stories, even if you're not hiring, even if you're not trying to find a new job, is really important. It can be such a wonderful team building exercise to like get to know some of these good things about your workplace and about yourself as a human.
Man, that's amazing. I'm flashing back to vet school, and I still remember some of the colleagues that were the best storytellers, right? And it's always like at the lunch table, everyone's sitting around them and just hanging on their every word, because they can just masterfully tell the events, but in this way where you're like, oh man, it just sticks with you forever. So it's a good tip to sort of put those and write them down before they're needed, so you're not on the spot having to pull them up.
Yeah, you can use them and we have a download that we can share with the Veterinary Project, like 7 questions to ask your staff, because you can ask them you could ask one of them at a staff meeting. And we have questions that you can ask yourself too, to just get, just to think of a little bit about yourself. Or one question to ask a friend about yourself, so you can get a little bit more of an idea to gather some of those little stories, because in an interview, that's really important to give a story, because that's what's going to make you memorable. And if you're trying to get people to work at your practice or work at your workplace, those stories are really going to be important when they're coming to visit you, or if they're in a Zoom interview, they only get to see a tiny slice of you. So tell them more of your world and share with them something else about you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's amazing, Melanie. I feel like that's probably a good place to start winding it down. If people are interested in some of these resources that you've mentioned, either getting a hold of you or some of these handouts that you have available, where would be a good place to track you down?
Yeah, for sure. So you can visit our website, which is V like vets, S for stay, G for go, and then D for diversify. So VSGD.co. And all of our information is on there. I'm also at MEL at VSGD.co. You can find me on Instagram and LinkedIn and on Facebook as well. So all over those places. I'd love to hear from you. And maybe I can also share the links to those direct questions if people wanted to grab them in the show notes or something like that, if that's cool.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you pass those along, we'll be sure to insert them. Excellent. Well, it was great to have you back, second time on the podcast. As always, we like to wrap every show here with a final word to you. What message would you like to leave for the veterinary community?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I think personally, I'm going to say, since we've been talking about storytelling, I am going to say, and I do really believe this, that everybody has really great stories in you to connect, both about your workplace, about you, about your life as a veterinarian or as a veterinary professional, that you can use to connect to other people and bridge that gap and make connection and trust a real thing. And it isn't, even if you feel like you're the worst storyteller in the world, I can guarantee you have amazing stories inside of you. And you have amazing stories in your life. You could not have walked into any exam room in any kind of veterinary. You can't have even been part of the veterinary world without having some sort of hilarious and amazing story. I can guarantee you, you've had bodily fluids all over you. You've had all sorts of things happen to you. And there are great things that you can pull out that show who you really are and what matters to you most.
Thank you for listening to the Veterinary Project Podcast. As a recap on behalf of our hosts, the Veterinary Project Podcast will be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks. So be sure to tune in as we bring you more conversations aimed at helping you enjoy a life well lived. If you enjoyed what you heard on the show and want to stay in the know, please like, love, and/or subscribe to the podcast on the listening platform of your choosing, as we're available on all the usual suspects. If you know of others who may benefit from these conversations, we'd love it if you shared the show with them. This helps us to grow our community and reach more and more veterinary professionals, just like you. Speaking of which, if you would like to get connected with more like-minded individuals who are joining us on this journey, please send us a message via Instagram @The Veterinary Project, and we'll invite you to be a part of our private Facebook group. General feedback, requests for information, or requests to be a guest on the show can also be sent via direct message to our Instagram @The Veterinary Project. Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Light, thank you for listening to the show, and we'll catch you again in 2 weeks for another episode of the Veterinary Project Podcast. Bye for now.